So we're looking forward, B'ez Hashem, to continue today. Welcome back, of course. On page Kuf Chavav, on the original text, and the opposite is 250. As you recall, last week we began a new epistle, Yud Ches, the 18th, and we had one class in it. This is the second, and it's 2 lines from the bottom, which read Val Zek Siv, and on this it says Simchot Tzadikim Hashem, that the righteous will rejoice in Hashem. And not every person merits this. Now, just to be clear, firstly, again, we do mention that wherever you're watching the class, there is the advantage. We say, for example, we just began a new chapter. If you're just a newcomer, and to follow this very chapter, it would be TanyaOnline.com, the original website, TanyaOnline.com, has all the previous classes lined up on the left side of the screen, and it goes from top to bottom. It's easy to access. Example, the last class, and for that matter, as we mentioned, we merited to conclude the entire. This is the 4th segment. We merited to conclude the entire Likutei Amorim, first and second, which would be Shaykh B'Emunah, and then Igeres HaTshuva, and now we're holding Igeres HaKodesh, which is the 4th segment of 5 segments, which is Tanya Kardisha is comprised of. We mentioned many times there's precision in the number 5. This is known to be the Teresh B'Ksav of Teres Achsidus. This is the 4th segment, the Igeres HaKodesh. Again, it is in a distinct segment, different, and certainly than the previous. We had a whole presentation in the beginning of Yud, which is the 10th epistle. No need to repeat. There's a backdrop to the entire Igeres HaKodesh on its own. But the idea that which makes it distinct from the previous, it's Igeres, it's letters, it's epistles written in different times, in different situations. Again, we mentioned this time and again, but we had a full presentation again, about 7 back, which is the beginning of Yud, beginning of the 10th epistle. So, if you recall last week, we spoke about the Aveda or the Av, or the love of the Tzaddik, and the type of love. The Alter Rebbe calls it, based on the pasuk of Shlomo Melech Shir Ashir, Mayafisu Mana'amt Ava B'Tanugim, a pleasurely love, which means there's a love that a person strives and yearns, seeks to obtain something, assert something which would contribute to their satisfaction, pleasure, and then there's the experience when the person's there already, experiencing that which they aspire to. They're presently experiencing it, then it is a deeper, a much more pleasurable and deeper love than the Avo Kirish Be'esh, which the fiery love a Yid has for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's more when he really connects, he has that intimate connection, basking in the experience of that love with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and that connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That Ava is something which is the greatest level of Ava, for that matter. As we know, there's many levels of Avas Hashem. Many, the Alter Rebbe has so many, even in Likutei Amorim, a number of places. But Ava B'Tanugim is the highest level of Ava, because the person is there, he's misanig al Hashem. He has great delight and pleasure. Because Baruch Hu, again, you see the last class, we're just repeating this briefly. We did mention Alter Rebbe has in the very beginning of Tanya, when he describes actually the Tzaddik, the Tzaddik Gomor. So the Tzaddik Gomer experiences Ava B'Tanugim. Alter Rebbe makes it clear, much greater than the Ava Krish Be'esh, the Ava which a person is driven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, he's with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that Ava is something totally different. This is the Ava that Alter Rebbe is talking about. Again, see the previous class. It's a click away. And Alter Rebbe continues today about Zek Siv Simchot Tzadikim Hashem. And this is what it says, the Tzadikim have rejoice in Hashem. Not every person merits the Simcha Hashem. My greatest joy is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I don't think so, not necessarily. If we're only honest with ourselves. Now, is the Yid constantly feel that he's on duty, he's in the arena of Avodas Hashem? Of course he does. That's why a Yid is constantly learning Torah and constantly doing mitzvahs, and constantly giving tzedakah, and constantly going to a minyan, and constantly Amin Yishmer Abba, Baruch Hu Baruch Shemay Amin. The average Yid does that, and the average Yid, it has a underlying Ava Takosh Baruch Hu, love Takosh Baruch Hu. So if you don't have love Takosh Baruch Hu, how do you consistent with putting on tefillin for 70 years in your life, 80 years, and beyond. Every single day, of course, there has to be an underlying love, because if you don't do something consistently for somebody, if you don't love them, as Alter Rebbe has in Peri Dalid in Likutei Amorim, also click away. The 4th chapter, in the first segment, Likutei Amorim, Alter Rebbe has an expression that the Hamekayim when you fulfill Hashem's mitzvahs, that's the one that's the greatest demonstration that you love HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So when someone's consistent with Avodah Hashem, of course there's a love to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Yeah, there's a drive. Every year there's a drive toward to do what the Eibishter wants, what Hashem wants. But to say that his joy, his default joy is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, my simcha is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When I gain a great deal of finances, meaning if I make a great deal that they're not jumping from joy, someone has something happened, begashmias, he got a new vehicle, whatever. There's a certain, we as human beings, we don't rejoice in things which contribute to our comfort, pleasure, satisfaction. Of course we do. The tzaddik simcha is exclusively b'Hashem. That when he says Lo kol adam zeichel leze, not every person merits this, because this is unique, because this is default by the tzaddik. That says simcha tzaddikim b'Hashem, they don't have any other joy, only in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's something different than the standard underlying contentment of a yid when he serves HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or contentment which establishes by him that drive to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Here you're talking about an overt simcha, like someone is sameach by a particular simcha. He has a joyful experience. He's dancing. The tzaddikim dance with HaKadosh. They're sameach with HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'emes, and that dark Lo kol adam zeichel leze, and not every person merits it. And he continues, but this is the level of the kohen with the desire of the heart, which is again the kohens which serve in the Beis Hamikdash. They represent the Am Yisrael in the service of the Beis Hamikdash. The Zayar speaks about the kohen kana berusad but the kohen with the desire of the heart, which this is synonymous with it, or the Zayar Kodesh speaks about the tzaddik, that his ru'usa delibo, his desire of his heart, is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And just like when you look at a kohen, not everybody can become a kohen. And this is the message of Lo kol adam zeichel leze, that not everybody merits to be this simcha, they have that simcha, that default simcha in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is synonymous with the message that just like not everybody can become a kohen, so too, Lo kol adam zeichel leze. And therefore the Zayar Kodesh said this is kahana berusa deliba. It's a pasuk which says that when HaKadosh Baruch Hu extends the avodah to the kohenim, the HaKadosh Baruch Hu says it's a matana. So generally, we think about matnas kahuna, it is the matana HaKadosh Baruch Hu allots for the kohenim. Their portions, their nichalkecha v'nechalascha, the meiser, the truma, the meiser behema, all these gifts which are given by the Am Yisrael to the kohen. There's of course the matana, but the Eibishter ascribes even the avodas matana. The whole idea the Eibishter gave the kohen and selected the kohen from Am Yisrael to do the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash. That's avodas matana. That's a gift HaKadosh Baruch Hu is giving to the kohen. And vazara kari, but because it's given exclusive to the kohen, just like in halacha, vazara kari by Yisrael comes and wants to do the avodah of the kohuna in the Beis Hamikdash, or in the Mishkan in the Beis Hamikdash. There was a consequence of heder achayim, to say there was misa b'di shamayim, because it's not your terrain, it's not your territory, it's exclusive for the kohen. And this is an avodah. This is the type of tzaddik which we say that he's similar to the kohen, that he has this gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu extended that level of connection with the tzaddik, that the tzaddik is able to experience the ava b'tanugim, this pleasurably, delightful love that is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being in this space, connecting already deeply intimately with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And he is the kohen and he is the one which is Sameach b'HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His default simcha is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu throughout the 24 hours. His excitement is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His joy is an overt joy with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this is given precisely to this individual, to this tzaddik, and not everybody is on that level to even Kol Hazara Koriv. It's loy kol adam zeichel hazeh, which you see, he draws the line. Hazara Koriv, just like a Yisrael cannot jump into the arena of the kohen, because they Abishta gave that gift to the kohen, so too, loy kol adam zeichel hazeh. Not everybody merits to be the simchot tzaddikim Hashem, or to have the ava b'tanugim. So one's going to say, maybe if I try very hard, I will reach a level of ava b'tanugim. He says, no, that's the point of a matana. If it's a deal, it's a sale, so you're going to try to work very hard to accumulate so much money in order to go ahead with that sale and buy that precious product. But it's a gift. It's solely dependent on the kindness and the grace of the giver of the gift and who he wants to choose to give that gift to. And Hashem chose the kohen to give the kahuna, the avodah, and he gave it to them as a gift. And therefore, he chose the kohen, so their Hazara Koriv, Yisrael has no business entering that space. So too, the tzaddik was gifted this level, and therefore, Kol Adam Zeichel Hazeh. And therefore, a person can't say, I'm going to try very hard to reach that level of Ava B'Tanugim. He says, no, Ein Derech HaSigah Digez Basar. It's not. There's no way to reach it through toiling, even toiling in Avodas Hashem. A person doesn't reach this Ava B'Tanugim, because that's the point of a gift. A gift is given by the choice of the giver. When you have an expensive item on the shelf, and a bunch of people are trying to obtain it, so each one's going to make a bigger effort, give a bigger bid, or accumulate and work very hard to accumulate that amount of money that they can take that home. A jewel or whatever it is, something which has intrinsic value and something which is expensive, something which is costly. Yeah, everybody could work harder and yet harder till the one who works the hardest, it's not always like that, but generically speaking, will be able to obtain that important item. But when we're talking about an item which is in the hands of the gifter, meaning to say the one who's giving the gift, it's his or her choice who they're giving the gift to. And you could try to work very hard, but you're not necessarily becoming closer. There's a concept that you find grace in the eyes of the one who's giving the gift. They might be turning to you, but it's not something that you could really do and say with certainty that I'm going to work very hard and I'm going to obtain the gift. No, this by definition, the gift is in the hands of the ones giving the gift. And if they chose another party, so you cannot, as much as you will work to receive it, they did not choose you. There's a special connection with the tzaddik that the Eibishter extends that unique and deep and intimate relationship with that particular tzaddik, and therefore simchut tzaddikim Hashem, their whole joy is in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And v'lei kol adam zeichel, and not everybody merits that. Similar to the Yisrael, cannot come and do the avodah of the kohanim. Avodas matana etenis konaschem. Even the avodah itself is a matana, is a gift to who? To the kohen. The Rebbe says when you talk about like Gias Basar, toil, toil does work in other areas, and is meant to work in other areas, which is the areas of Yiras Hashem, to fear God. Then toil plays an important role in a person obtaining Yiras Hashem, fearing God. So to this level, but but comes to fear, it comes to awe, revering HaKadosh Baruch Hu, awe of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then, of course, not only one can obtain Yiras Hashem through Yigiyas Basar, through toil, but it's demanded from the person. Sheshayli noleh, the neshama is asked and inquired upon this very Yigiya, and neshama is asked, Yogaita b'yira? Did you toil in Yiras Hashem? And to the extent like it says in Reishis Chochmah, Woe is to the person who did not toil in Yiras Shamayim. For Yiras Shamayim, one has to toil. And the Alter Rebbe has this over here, famously in Perik Mem Beis, in Likutei Amorim, which is again the first segment. The Alter Rebbe has a whole section regarding Yigia and Yira. It alludes to it over here, Uksiv, like it says in Biyirim, Tivakshena Bekesef, that you have to seek it based on this pasuk. Melamed, etc. Melamed, from this pasuk we glean shetzricha yigia rabo, that it needs great toil, much toil, vatsuma, and intense toil. Just like someone's looking for treasures. He knows in this area, this terrain, there's treasures, and these treasures are somewhere. Again, they're hidden, they're buried. But the person knows that how much this treasure is so valuable to him or her. So what do? They start digging, and digging takes effort. But when you dig enough, you'll find the treasure. The Alter Rebbe, based on this pasuk, in Beis explains how in the end there is that treasure of Yiras Shamayim innately and inherently embedded in the psyche of every Yid because of his neshama as a chelik of the kamimal mamash. But nonetheless, it's deep within his neshama, and the person has to extract that Yira, to extract that Yiras Shamayim, and to bring it in. The lashon of the Alter Rebbe there in Membeis, in machshava dibur ma'aseh, in his thought, in his speech, in his action, that it should actually make a difference. That he should think like a Yid, or chas v'shalom not think on this which Hashem says, do not think that, do not look there, do not think that, do not entertain that with your audio faculties. And in speech, a person's careful what he says. And of course, on the positive, he utilizes his dibur and limidat Torah, in tefillah, prayer, and learning Torah, and so on. And of course, Maisa, his involvement in action. In Maisa means to be careful, and his scrupulousness, the Hidur mitzvah. Hashem says something has to be done, so the Yiras Shamayim does it exactly like that. And anything with any Hidur they find, they try to look for a Hidur for real. Of course, for real is an obvious thing, Nishkim Machter Hate, which is not even to be discussed. It's nonsense. But for real, I know Hashem wants it like this. And if I find the ability to do it this way, of course, because Hashem is a melech and a king, you're careful when you stand in front of a king. You're really careful when you stand in front of a king. You make sure everything's polished. You make sure not to do any movement or gesture which the king will not appreciate. Is that because of love of the king? Namely, no. It's because of the yira, the fear, the inner reverence, the pachad. That let me not do something, even the smallest minutia expression, which will trigger, so to say, the anger or the dislike, distaste of the king, standing in front of the king. And the Yid has Yid, the Yid, we always stand in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As the Alter Rebbe makes it clear, famously in Perik Mem Aleph, also worth to learn, to look at Mem Aleph in Likutei Amorim, that Hashem Nitzav Allah, Hashem standing over you, Melech Lord's Kavod, but Mabit Allah, He's looking over you, you're serving Him in a proper way. So somewhat, the realities of Elam Hazeh camouflage this idea as the person navigates through his day in different areas, what they encounter, just the regular person comes home and he's hungry, wants to eat. Just the simple ideas, or he's in his business. His focus, of course, is in his business. Of course, his focus is on when he's driving a car, that he's looking around to make sure his driving is safe. Which means, when you say the person encounters the realities of Mahaz, the regular interactions with Elam Hazeh somewhat camouflages that inner connection the Yid has with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the Yira stays aloof. This is synonymous with the message that the Yira becomes an Eitzer. The Yira is a treasure, and it's dug into the Neshama. But because the Neshama, before it comes down into this world, of course, it has the Yiras Shamayim is similar to the Yira of Malachim as an example. Like we say in davening, being the Birchas Krishma, Hamalachim have this constantly, they constantly demonstrate their submission and subordinates to HaKadosh Baruch Hu with love and with fear. Because they feel they're always standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the neshama also, before the neshama invested in the body, of course, that was default by the neshama. But once invested in the body, it just even lives as a frum yid, but it lives in Eilam Hazeh. So the yid becomes an eitzer, a pleasure, removed. Its connection is with the core of the neshama, where the yid shamayim is aligned with. As we said, the yid has inherent yid shamayim because he has a chelik alakami mal mamosh. He is a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He is a part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the yira is a part of the hard drive of the yid, but because he deals with the regularities of Eilam Hazeh, even the frum yid goes to daven 3 times a day and shiuri teira and mekayim mitzvahs behidon and stuff, but the sensation of yira is because the person is just navigating Eilam Hazeh, the as an neshama big goof, and neshama invested in body. So the Torah says your guide to be yira, you have to work very hard to extract that yira shamayim, that oitzer, that treasure of shamayim, and yes, make it relevant in your machshava, in your thought. That your thought should be perfectly aligned with the way that Hashem wants a yid to think, and what Hashem does not want a yid to think. On the negative and again the positive, Hashem wants a yid to think matters of Torah, matters of his beinunus on elokus, and the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That should preoccupy our thought. So the Yira Shamayim would come down. We have to search it, to extract it. Just like someone digs, he pulls out the treasure and makes it relevant to him or her. In other words, they make it relevant to their life. Now, here they were struggling to make ends meet, and now they pull the treasure out and they incorporate it into their lifestyle. Now it's a different lifestyle because I found that treasure. Of course it's a different lifestyle. By far. Here I was struggling, and here I have abundance of parnas, or abundance of for my livelihood, because I found that treasure. So I don't leave it separate and put it on the shelf, leave it on the shelf and celebrate periodically that I found the treasure. No, I take the treasure and incorporate it into my lifestyle. If I'm only a healthy person, I incorporated that now things are different. I don't have to struggle so much to make ends meet. Now I could live expansively because that treasure didn't remain separate. I took the treasure from under the earth where it was buried, but I dug it up with great toil, of course, and I took it and I inculcated, I incorporated into my lifestyle as a human being, and of course that makes an important change. Similarly, when it comes to Yira Shamayim, the Yigiyah has to be that I find the treasure of Yira Shamayim. I find that Yira Shamayim, which is again fixed in and part of my neshama, and I incorporate it into my machshava dibra ma'aseh. I think like a yid, I talk like a yid, and I act like a yid on a constant basis. So Yira, one has to toil. And Sheilon l'la yagaito b'Yira. Oile basar, Rishus Chachma says, Oile, woe is the flesh that did not toil. It's not going to come just like that. It will not come just like that. You will need to toil. We need to, not will, we need to toil to extract the Eitzer, the treasure of Yerushalayim, and bring it into our lives and live according to that treasure. And what type of Yigiyah? Rabba, a great, a grand Yigiyah, an intense Yigiyah, like the toil, a person which knows there's treasures under this area. What is the person going to leave back in order to find these treasures? The answer is nothing. They're going to toil and toil and toil because they know there's a treasure there, and extract that treasure. And again, namely, incorporate it into their lifestyle. So too, it's the treasure of Yerushalayim is there, and we have to search it. We have to search it with great yigiyah, with great toil and intense toil, and to pull it from where it is and bring it into our machshava dibur ma'aser, our thought, speech, and action, which encapsulates the whole formal devotion of a yid to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. His limud Torah, his shmira of his machshava, riyah, shmiyah. And again, on the positive side, utilizing his machshava for this, which a machshava is meant to be utilized for, his speech, And of course, his mice is action, aligned with the Ratzon Hashem, with Hashem wants and demands the action of a Yid to be. But that is when it comes to Yiro. But when it comes to Avo, Rabo, this level of love, which is ultimately puts in brackets Ava B'Tanugim, this love, which again, make no mistake, it's not the lower levels of love, which perhaps an average Yid could maybe reach there. Maybe. The underlying Ava, of course every Yid reaches the underlying Ava. You love a Kodesh Baruch Hu, therefore you're doing what Hashem wants on a constant basis. But that sensational love, the highest, the deepest sensational love you could have with Kodesh Baruch Hu, known as Ava B'Tanugim, a pleasurable, delightful love. That name from Latam Yaleb B'Mailo, that comes into the person. That's why it's a matana. It comes from Kodesh Baruch Hu B'Lishi Yachid B'Chavin Lo. Not necessarily the person would prepare himself to it, and not necessarily would have that intent to obtain it. So does it mean that everybody, Hashem just picks and chooses and says, that person I'm going to give this Abba B'Tanugim. That person will wake up in the morning and his drive, his love, his tiny, his great delight, his simcha, his joy, there's going to be only in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And we say it's a matan. And for that we can't toil up to it. In other words, to get to it through toil. No. So does it mean HaKadosh Baruch Hu just chooses arbitrarily? We say, no, of course the Yid has to do whatever he can to have the Yira Shamayim. And when the person has Yira Shamayim, and Yira Shamayim also, he seeks deeper and deeper type of reverence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And particularly he comes to this level of Yiras HaReimamus, as it says in a number of places. One of the highest levels of expression of Yira Shamayim, of fearing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is fearing the exaltedness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's sometimes a Yid has Yira Shamayim. Oh, Hashem says, not to do that. Of course I won't do that. I'm not going to rebel in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem says, don't talk that. Of course I'm not going to rebel in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is standing right over here and he's saying, do not. And I'm going to say yes. Impossible. This is what Yira Shamayim demands. Chas v'shalom, the Lashon Al Tereba, le'limre b'melech macham HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Actually, in the same Perek Daled, he speaks right away the two different levels of Yira. There he calls it Yira Beishis, which is not so far from the idea of Yira Shreimus. It has a similarity. That there's the idea that Hashem is a king and I don't want to rebel in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem says, don't think that I won't. Hashem says, don't speak that I won't. Don't do that I won't. And then, yes, think that when it comes to this, which we're meant to think, machshav, utilize our thought. Yes, speak that, primarily in davening, limud Torah, chaimim, the Gemara in Erevin. There's chaimim l'meitzeim b'peh, that it's incumbent on a person when he learns Torah to say the words of Torah. And of course, ma'aseh mitzvahs, to do what Hashem wants us to do. And limud Torah, le'posik pum migir, so constantly learn Torah, dafka b'dibur. Of course, it's not always a famous question. A person listening to a shir and Torah is mekayim mitzvahs limud Torah. Of course, he is, because that's the setup. That's the one person's talking. Everybody's listening. But usually, a person takes a Gemara and sits down to learn. He has to not only understand. Understanding is the most important part of limud Torah. It's not Tehillim that you're reading. You must understand it perfectly. We spoke about it just a few weeks ago. Within the last few weeks, that is. As Allah Rebbe Lashon is, if you didn't understand what you're learning, it's not called learning at all, because it's about understanding every Rashi, every thesis 100%, not 70%. And the Gemara has to be understood 100%. But nonetheless, as the Gemara based on the pasuk Chaimim l'mitziim, Chaimim mitziim b'peh, we have to utter the words of Torah. So Hashem says to me that I should utilize my speech in Torah. Of course, I'm going to learn Torah with diburos. I'm going to Torah assiduously, diligently, in general. That's what the Eibishter wants. I'm going to rebel in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But then that is more kind of a robotic fear, if you will. Hashem is the king. He says no, I am going to say no. He says yes, I'm going to say yes. But then there's something that a person reaches the sensation of appreciating the Melech himself. That as the person reaches that level that I sense the king which is standing in front of me. I sense it. I sense Hashem. I sense the exaltedness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I sense the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And my fear comes consequent to that. It's like you have to tell a person who's standing in front of the king, make sure to stand straight, make sure to stand respectful, make sure there's no stain on your shirt, make sure your buttons are polished. It's obvious. It's not something that the king tells him. He doesn't want to rebel on the king. He's standing in front of the king. He is standing in front of you. You're standing in front of a king. Consequently, you're doing all this which the king would tell you to do, or you know what the king wants from you to do at that very moment. Certainly you're not going to do or say or gesture something which is contrary to the king's desire. Not because, the king said, no, I'm going to chas v'shalom not say yes. It's just you're standing in front of the king. Of course, he won't do anything which is antithetical to the spirit, even the smallest of the kings, that is, even the smallest gesture. That is the yira, even with the tzaddik, with his great toil, could reach. Which in the overall, we're talking about yira shamayim, which is those who have that yira shamayim, or those who toiled in yira shamayim, and namely those who came to this yira, the highest level, a deep level of yira saremimos, sensing the exaltedness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. These are the people. These are the yidden who go into that, so to say, into that group, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu, on his own, it's his choice, who is going to choose and say, I want to extend the level of Ava, and Ava b'tanugim, that tzaddik, by default, that yid, by default, should have to joy in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and his greatest pleasure is with that deep, sensational, and intimate connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu just arbitrarily picks any person, no. After this yid becomes, so to say, part of this elite group of in the context of Eved Hashem, in the context of Yira Shamayim, that he toiled for Yira, which is incumbent upon the Yid to toil for Yira, like we said, that She'lo lo yagai to be Yira, and he was in the Yageya, and he had that toil, which means with the Yageya, with this great effort and exertion in order to extract the Yira Shamayim, which is part of his nefesh, and more so, he reached the Yira Saremimos, he reached that Yira, sensing the exaltedness of the king. It's like, if you imagine someone standing in front of a king. Today we don't have kings, for that matter. It's a good thing, probably overall it's a good thing, because many of history, kings and monarchs in history, just allow the power to go to their head, if you will, and things didn't turn out exactly the way it was meant to, or the way it was pledged to in the very beginning of the relationship with their nation, with their subject. It's where the democracy idea came in, which is a commendable system, very much a very condoning society to have such a system, because again, there's limitations in different branches, and as we know, the setup of democracy, true democracy, but there is always something special about the king-subject relationship. Of course, a proper king. There was Malachim b'Yisrael, David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech, kings among Israel, and of course, the king among Israel. There was also those who, on the surface, or beyond on the surface, were not proper Malachim, as we know, for the simple reason they don't adjust, they not forget, but they allow the power to reach them in areas that they lose their proper approach and pledge to their nation on the onset, because they obtain so much power. They change, they modify, and unfortunately could lead in, as it has happened in history among the nations of the world, the kings of nations of the world, and lahavdil by Malchi Yisrael. But when there is a proper relationship of king and subject, it is something very special in this democracy. The democratic setup does not have it. It's very special and it's very unique. The king is a kingly individual. And it's not someone who just put on a crown. It has to be, like Gemara says, Keser Helmose. So by David HaMelech, he put on the crown. It says the crown fit him. And another person put on that same crown. It would look funny, perhaps even. It says the Gemara, David HaMelech had an image. They would have put on the crown fit him. But of course, it's much deeper than that. It's a personality, which is a kingly personality, an exalted personality, which the crown fits. And when you had that relationship, or you had that ability or there was a knowledge, there's a king, there was something very glorious, there was something very special, there was something very dignified about this experience of knowing that there is that exalted personality leading the country, leading the people, and has the benefit of the people in mind. And when the king came out, and people had ability to take a look at the king, it's a different personality, different persona, it's a different image. It's a human being, but something totally different. That's the definition of a real melech. And there's certain times the melech came out, and people had the ability to take a peek at the melech. And when someone came closer to the king, there was in the face of the king. For that matter, even today, when someone comes stands in face of a president, a renowned president, a president of a great country, of a superpower, there's something which a person, his mindset, his whole composure, posture changes the moments he stands in front of even an important personality of power. And that it's based on the level of the individual which he or she is standing in front of. If it's a president, or it's a high-leveled ranking member in the administration of this president, as an example, vice president, there's different levels, of course, extracts a certain approach, a natural, an instinctive approach towards that great and important personality. A president of a world superpower, of course, there's power there. And when you stand in front of that president, you feel something. There's something which there's a certain, you're not the same as when you're sitting in your home or on your couch and so on, your shoes off or something. There's some composure, there's a change in your posture and your composure. And this is when you're talking about even in the way things are set up presently, in the West at least. In the past, there was the king phenomenon, king subject phenomenon. The king came out, you stood there in absolute awe in front of the king. And if he looked at you, and if he paid attention to you, if he summoned you, it wasn't just a bit different. You transformed into a total, unrecognizable image of yourself. Totally different of your regular self. Totally different. That's the idea of Yiras HaReimamus. The person, the Yid, feels the exaltedness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Eibishter Hashem is a king. He's not only a father, which he is. He's not only a master, which he is. He's not only a spouse, which he is. He is a Melech, Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He's not only a king, but he's a king of all kings. So there ought to be a Yira Shemayim. You're standing in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So there's ideas standing in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, so Hashem is a king. I won't rebel in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's more, again, a disciplinarian type of expression in that relation with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the framework of Yira. But then there's, and therefore Hashem says, I will not do differently. Hashem says to do, of course I will do it. But then there's the Yiras HaReimamus, that you sense HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You feel the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in front of you. Of course, it cannot be described because it's a sensation. And therefore, the not doing that Hashem says not to do it's automatic. And the slightest thing, we know that it's not perfectly aligned with Hashem. Hashem's desire, of course, I will never even debate if I should connect to that or not. Hashem doesn't want it. And what Hashem does want me to do, I'm more than there, because I sense the exalted presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Melech Malchei Amlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it extracts this deeper yira. So after a person toiled and he reached this level of Yiras Hashem in general. He extracted that treasure of Yiras Shamayim. And then he was Nisyagea Yiras Aremimos, even higher, the deeper level of Yira. He reached the ultimate goal, what a person could appreciate from this level of Yira, which is also based on the neshama of the Yid. And in brief, we know that the neshams, even though all neshams come from one place, but as Alter Rebbe writes in the second chapter, it's worth to see, second chapter of Likutei Amarim, why there are variations in neshamas, nefesh, ruach, and so on. There's so many different levels of the neshamas, even though they come from one place. Again, take a look there in Beis, second chapter of Likutei Amarim, the first segment. So also based on the neshama, that's the level, the area which a person could connect to in his identifying with his own Yiras Shamayim, with his own treasure of Yiras Shamayim, and more so as Yiras Hareim, was this higher and deeper level of Yira, of the exaltedness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is produces an exalted Yira, not only a robotic Yira. Hashem says, no, I don't want to rebel, but a deep level of Yira. It's also based on the Neshama of the Yid. This idea that something should be based on the Neshama of the Yid, also the Alter Rebbe has it in Perik Yud Gimel of Igeres HaKodesh, which is this segment. Alter Rebbe speaks there, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the Piskei Dinim, the significant majority of the time, Beis Shammai was machmir, was more stringent, and Beis Hillel was mekel, was lenient. And Alter Rebbe explains what is lenient. Lenient means to say that Beis Hillel said this could be elevated, this can be sublimated, and can be utilized in the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Beis Shammai said no, which is the basis of their chumras and kulas, the stringencies and their leniencies. The Alter Rebbe says, why was it so? Why would the significant majority of the Piskei Dinim of Beis Shammai stringent and Beis Hillel lenient? Is because the source of the neshama of Beis Shammai was Gvura, the midah, the attribute of Gvura, or is connected more to Gvura. Every neshama comes from the chokhmah that seals, but nonetheless, as it makes its way down, it adapts certain midas, or ultimately certain worlds, like the Alter Rebbe writes there in Perik Beis. So the Beis Shammai's sheidish was midas hagvura, and therefore he was more machmir, he was more stringent. Beis Hillel came from chesed, and therefore they were more lenient. So the idea that even over here, the ability of the Yid could obtain this level of Yiras Shamayim, and namely this level of Yiras Hareim, is also b'chinas nishmasi. Even though no one knows the level of neshama, so how does a person deal with this matter? How does they approach this matter? Of course, with yigia, search, seek, toil, find that treasure of Yiras Shamayim. Incorporate the treasure of Shamayim. When you incorporate the treasure of Yiras Shamayim, your thoughts are not the same. Your speech is not the same. Your actions are not the same. And if it fades away, continue digging for more of this treasure of Yiras Shamayim, which is there. It's guaranteed it's there. It's part and parcel of your neshama. If the neshama is a chelik of the kamimal, part of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of course it has that yira, that treasure of Yiras Shamayim. And it's only incumbent upon us to dig and to seek it and to toil to obtain it. So when a person reaches as much as he can, and also again, a contributing factor is according to his neshama, his source, where his neshama is rooted, that will establish the type of gain, the type of the obtaining of the level of this which neshama would obtain, or the depth or the dimension of the Yiras Shamayim based on Sherish Nishmasei, they will obtain, which includes again not only the Yiras Shamayim, the Yiras Shamayim, but deeper level within that treasure, which is the Yiras Hareim. When the person reaches that, in other words, on the surface, a person can say, okay, can I find out what my source of my neshama is, and then I'll put it into the computer how much I have to toil. We don't know. No one tells us what the source of our neshama is. The only one who knows is HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. What the Eibishter tells us, you toil, and the source of your neshama will play a role how you will be in the success process, in the obtaining process. But namely, what is incumbent upon the Yid to toil. So after the Yid toils, that he reaches the highest level and the ultimate, how much they could be masig, how much they could appreciate from it, from this energy of Yerushalayim. And also, this is based on this, their neshama, so they become an elite group of Yerushalayim. Then HaKadosh Baruch Hu would choose you to extend this love, that relationship with love. And what kind of love? The deeper and higher level known again is Abba B'Tanugim, the pleasure, the delightful love, which comes again from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's why it's categorized again. It's a matana, lishkin u'lisyached, to dwell and to become one with that yira. The Ava looks for the yira. If a person is Yira Shamayim, the Ava will extend itself to it. So yes, it is a matana. You can't toil for the Ava directly, but when you toil is in Yira Shamayim. When a person toils in Yira Shamayim, then the Ava will connect to that Yira. As Al explains there in that Perek Mem Dalid or Mem Beis, one of those two chapters, he brings an interesting lashon, which it says, Zocher Chazdei. So literally it means Zocher Chazdei, that Hashem remembers His chesed, remembers His kindness, remembers His love to His people, and so on. The Rebbe teaches also that Zocher Chazdei, chesed, Avas Hashem is a level of Zocher. Yiras Hashem is a level of Mekim. He brings certain psukim. In other words, it's the masculine energy, and fear of God is the feminine energy. And again, you could see it there. It brings certain psukim to support it. And therefore, Chazdei, which is associated with Avo, is Zocher, is the masculine energy. While Yiras Shamayim is the feminine. So the Gemara says that when it comes to a connection between husband and wife, man and the man and woman, who looks out to find the woman? The woman, the man, or man, the woman? So it's not exclusive. It's an idea that the woman also looks out for her companion in order to get married, to establish a life, a home, build a home. But by default, the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created, and this is the nature which is embedded in creation, is that the man looks out for a wife. The wife makes herself available to ultimately connect to that man in order to build their home. But who looks out for that companionship? Who looks out for this spouse? Is the nature is darke shel ish lachzer. Man looks out for this spouse. So when you say Yira Shamayim is the feminine energy, Avas Hashem is the masculine. So this fits so perfectly and so beautifully with this message that Hashem is ready to extend the gift. You cannot toil for a gift because you cannot toil for this gift like you cannot toil for any gift. As we mentioned before, if it's by definition a gift, it's totally in the hands of the one who's giving the gift. You can't toil for it because there's no price to it. However, when a person reaches this level, and as opposed to Yira Shamayim, a person not only can toil for Yira Shamayim, must toil for Yira Shamayim. Yogai Tabira, with great toil, it's like he's looking for treasures. And of course, it takes a lot of toil. And if it's a hot day, as an example, it's beyond toil. But he knows the treasures are there, and he goes to extract them. And so to Yira Shamayim, a person must toil with Yira Shamayim. But because Yira Shamayim is the feminine energy, it's aligned with the feminine. So darka shel ish lachzer chalisha, it's the derech of man to look out for the spouse. So too, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants a person reach the maximum they can reach in their toiling in Yira Shamayim, and how much more so in Yira Sarememu, that deeper level of Yira. So they are they are perfect, or they reached that level, perfect or not, but they reached the highest level of Yira Shamayim based on their toil. So they darka shel ish, which is Avas Hashem, and in this case Avas B'Tanugim, to find that Yirei Shamayim, to connect with that individual who toiled with Yirei Shamayim. Because darka shel ish, which is Ava lachzer isha, to look out for the feminine. In this case, it would be Yirei Shamayim. Commissioners Bar Likutei Amarim, like it's explained in the Likutei Amarim. Again, the first segment is Membeis. I believe it's Membeis. This whole the idea of Zochar Chazdei. I believe it's in Membeis, the 42nd chapter in Likutei Amarim, which is again a click away. We'll stop over here.